Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone in whatever geography you're in today. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. We are here with an international panel by Privacy Tools, and I welcome the panel that we have here, a high prolific panel with high experts on the issue of privacy. There's someone with a mic open. I ask you to kindly close it, please. And what we're going to do here today is to discuss questions about the privacy requirements that more and more society is discussing and debating about. And we're going to have an international perspective and not just a local perspective. I'm going to bring each panel on board to introduce themselves. I'll do the same for myself right now. My name is Robert Jansen. I run a startup accelerator in Brazil and California. I am one of the invested parties with Privacy Tools from the very early stage. This is something that, because of our past in the information security space, that we fully believe and support. I'm going to now give on to Aline De Pares, who is the CEO for Privacy Tools. Please, Aline, would you welcome the audience, please?
Thank you, Robert. Hi, everyone. My name is Aline De Pares, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Privacy Tools. I am very, very happy to be together with you all and the people that I use it for, and I expect to learn more about the privacy trends for our future. When we create the platform, our privacy law, LGPD, was not enforced, but we were convinced that our country would approve it soon to reach the expectations of our data subjects. I mean, that the expectations of everybody, and then we create a privacy platform to help companies to be compliant with the privacy and compliance requirements. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Aline. I'm going to pass on the word now to Dr. Anne Kavukian. Welcome, Dr. Anne.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you today. I'm so pleased that you're focusing on privacy by design as well. In Brazil, this is huge because we need to be proactive and embed privacy protective measures into the design of our operations before the privacy harms arise. Because otherwise we're going to lose the game, and we can't lose the game. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It's essential. We cannot give up our freedom. I speak to you as someone who is Armenian, whose freedom has, in the past, with my parents and grandparents, was jeopardized. But I always tell people, don't look at the odds. All you have to do is stand firm in your beliefs, follow through, and we can do this. I served as the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada, for 3 terms, so 17 years. And during that time, what I realized was if we're not vigilant in terms of protecting privacy, there's so many other interests that are going to come in and try to get by privacy. No, we fight hard. We can have privacy and data utility. We can do it all. Win-win. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anne. Then I'll pass the word now to Yasodara Cordova from Unico ID Tech.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for the invitation. It's a very, it's a great honor to be here. And I am right now the principal privacy researcher at the Unico, which means unique in Portuguese. We are a Brazilian unicorn. We are valued at 2.6 billion right now. We recently welcomed Goldman Sachs to our board of investors, and we offer digital identity solutions in the realm of digital admissions, continued education, e-commerce. We work with banks, retailers, and all types of market sectors to secure and validate identities. We are very much worried about privacy because our business is at the core of privacy right now. So it's going to be a very, very good debate, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Yasu. And Phil Lee, please take the stage.
Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak with such an esteemed panel today. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Phil Lee. I'm a partner in a law firm called Field Fisher, which is headquartered in the UK. A few years ago, I set up the Silicon Valley office of Field Fisher and worked in California for a few years. So I guess I've had the benefit of dealing with privacy issues on both sides of the Atlantic and seen two very different cultural approaches to how privacy is tackled. And I guess if I had to describe myself, I grew up in a household where my father was a programmer. So from my youngest ages, we always had a minimum of 3 machines in the house. So at a time when none of my friends had computers, we always had at least 3. And I grew up, I studied computer science at university, then became a lawyer practicing privacy. And I'm one of those people who's sort of half excited by what technology can achieve and half terrified by what it can achieve. And I always see sort of privacy as the gateway between striking that balance between the opportunities that technology presents to us, while also maintaining that sort of careful balance of not straying too far into the realm of things that we don't want technology to do.
Thank you very much, Phil. Well, my prestigious panelist, I want to lead off with a bit of context. And I was mentioning this earlier. I've had a journey in the information security and risk management space in the early 2000s, actually the late 90s, early 2000s. And at that time, we crossed paths with Esther Dyson, who was at the time the president of Software Public Association, and later on became the chairman of the ICON. And in 1999, there was reproduced an article by her in Folha de São Paulo, in São Paulo, that struck me, and I have it, and I carry it with me still today. Because she said that the future of the internet would rely only on one thing, on privacy. And she said, and I'm going to quote her now, and then I want you all to have a chance to comment on this later. But she said that the key issue is giving users control of their data and giving them the means to do that effectively. That's simple as that. So you have control and you have the means and tools to keep control. So I would like to lead off with, this particular statement by Esther Dyson, who was discussing this in 1996. So it has been over 2 decades, and in which this has been an issue and a growing concern. And I invite you, Dr. Anne, to lead off on the subject, because to me, it's nail on the head. It has to be by design. Otherwise, it's game over.
I couldn't agree more, Robert. I'm a big fan of Esther. I know her, of course. I first became appointed privacy commissioner in 1997, and I've watched ever since then all the activities. And I couldn't agree with everything she said. I always say privacy is all about control, personal control relating to the use and disclosure of your personal information. I always tell both companies and governments, you may have custody control over someone's data. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the data subject. So you have to provide them with the means to enable control to take place. Like Esther said, the technical means, how do we do this? And this is becoming increasingly difficult in that so often our personal information may be collected appropriately for the primary purpose of the data collection that you've consented to. But then a company starts using it for a variety of other secondary uses and sharing it with third parties, unauthorized third parties, and then your privacy goes out the window. So I often tell companies, one of the first things you should be doing is create a data map. Do you have a data map? And they look at me and they go, huh? And I say, map the flow of your data as it comes into your company or your organization. Usually the first instance, consent is obtained and it's appropriate. But then after that, often that is eroded and additional consents which are required for secondary uses go out the window. So create a data map, follow the flow of the data, and ensure that the individual, the data subject, can preserve control over their personal information. This is critical.
Yes, indeed. And I think this is what was at the gist of the architecture of what Aline and her partner Madison foresaw when they thought about privacy tools. Because I have learned that privacy tools actually is something that came from the learnings of their endeavor of having a company that was focused on information and distributing information in the financial sector. So I'd like to take the chance, Aline, please, if you could comment on how that the fact that the privacy and the control given to the entity that's at the gist of the architecture of Privacy Tools platform.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. before I need to talk about my English is not so good, but I'm trying to speak today here. We create a platform, privacy tools, to give compliance for all companies, support our law before, but it's not only LGPD. We develop a platform to support requirements and compliance compliance requirements. I believe, Robert, if you can get.
No, yeah, and I'll lead off now and pass on to Yasu, because she, as a researcher, probably is finding a lot in her studies of what's really happening and what's not really happening and what needs to take place. So, Yasu, please share with us.
Well, I think having this historical perspective is really, really interesting, because I used to say that first we developed a way to make information travel with resilience, which was the internet. Then we developed the idea introduced by Tim Berners-Lee, which was the web. So we got the World Wide Web to share and organize information. And now we have to teach technology how to keep secrets, which is really hard. It's the most difficult part. And in developing countries, I might say that we have a trend to develop technologies that can safely log in people and help them have access to digital life in a way that they can better be safe in the online world. So we are leaning towards technologies that involve biometrics. And because of that, we have to really define why we're using biometrics to make access to services, banks, and employment, digital employment, onboarding platforms and stuff like that with biometrics, because it makes these people safer instead of using passwords, for example, and separating this from the trends in surveillance. So this is an important question when you talk about privacy globally. And so we have a lot of technologies that we can use for that. We are at Unico, we are betting on research, because this is a long-term, medium long-term run. So we have goals for 5-10 years, and we want to achieve them. Basically, we have the principles already. We have the laws in place. In Brazil, we have the LGPD, which is a very fine regulation, follows the GDPR. And we already have the playground set up. We just have to research and develop services that comply with these principles and laws, I think.
Yeah. So, Yasu, you mentioned GDPR. In Brazil, we have LGPD. California has CCPA. And I know that about another 32 states in the US are going to follow suit on what California is doing. But I want to ask Phil. Phil, you stand there over Europe, and we know how diverse culturally Europe is, and we know also other geographies have their own diversity issues. And at the same time, we have to create a common understanding, a common ground for what really and how we deal with privacy. So have you seen any progress in these less mature geographies in adopting something that's commonly adopted elsewhere where you have more mature markets? Because I understand that Phil Fisher has a pretty wide global footprint.
We do, yes, that's correct. We've got offices in a number of countries, and I mean it's interesting. I years ago I used to give presentations where sort of back in 2010, 2011, where I would talk about how many countries worldwide had privacy laws. And I forget the exact number at the time. It was around sort of 60, 70, whatever it is. I think if you were to look at that number today, you would find we're probably north of 150 countries worldwide that have data protection laws. And there was a point around sort of 2013 or so where we actually kind of reached a tipping point where there were more countries worldwide with data protection laws than there were without data protection laws. And so sort of jokingly, I used to kind of describe data protection as being almost like a virus. It was spreading everywhere. But I think, privacy laws are really a reflection of society's demand to have a respect for privacy, and that's where these laws stem from. And I think where one of the big challenges whenever you're introducing any kind of law is to reflect the culture of the society that you are introducing that law to. And so, if you're introducing something like privacy, particularly in a world where technologies operate globally and data transfers everywhere, ideally you would have the same rules apply absolutely everywhere. And that presents challenges when you are operating across territories that all have very different cultures. And the EU is a very good example of that, because we have 27 different member states of the EU. We had the UK was part of it, isn't anymore, but we adopted kind of one law that applied across all of these countries. And when you sort of ask yourself, how do you go about and do that? I think it's because when you get down to the nub of it, there are some very core principles that apply across any privacy regime, wherever you tend to look. There's always this idea around transparency. There's always an idea around kind of individual choice of, some requirement around security. And so wherever you're looking to create a law, a new rule, you can start to embed those core principles, and then it's a matter of kind of fleshing them out and building out from them. And actually, when I used to teach junior lawyers about getting into privacy in the first place, I would actually start off just saying to them, imagine you want to create a law to protect data. Imagine you want to create a privacy law. What are the things you would think about? And when you ask anybody that question, just as an open question, they will always start to say to you, well, I want to know who has my data, and I want to have the right to control my data. And if I give my data to somebody to use it for this purpose, I want them only to use it for that purpose, not for something else. And so you start to see there are some very global concepts, global principles that can apply pretty much everywhere. I think the other thing that happens, the GDPR, I guess, was a bit of a watershed for the world in terms of privacy evolution. I won't say revolution, because in many ways I think it was just an evolution of what we had beforehand. But there have been lots of countries since the GDPR that have gone on to adopt laws that are very similar to the GDPR, or have reformed their existing regimes to adopt GDPR standards. And some of that, I think, is a reflection of just the need to update laws to reflect changes in technology. Some of it is a desire to have greater global interoperability of laws. And a lot of it, frankly, I think, is commercial pressure, because when you are dealing with a bloc like the EU, a lot of businesses that wanted to do business in the EU found that they had to suddenly had to be GDPR compliant in order to operate there. And so, what you ended up doing effectively was exporting GDPR standards to other territories around the world anyway. And once you start doing that, it becomes relatively commonsensical for those countries to then start adopting those standards into their own national laws anyway.
Very good. Yeah, I like that answer very well. One of the things that we see happening in the market is that finally organizations are realizing that can be a competitive edge for them as their value proposition to the market if you go out there and educate their constituency. Dr. Anne, I'd like to learn from you and the audience as well. What do you see going forward at the design level that these organizations that are taking the first lead and trying to make that into a competitive advantage should be thinking of, so they really make that leading advantage consolidate and not just be something that disappears?
I couldn't agree with you more, Robert. I work with KPMG, and we certify companies for privacy by design. And companies that have become certified for privacy by design have come back to me and said, we love this. It's giving us a competitive advantage over the other guys, because increasingly people are very concerned about their privacy, and they want to be able to exert control over the uses of their personal information, who gains access to it, how is it used, etc. Privacy by design delivers on that. And you see, this is where it goes beyond privacy laws. And let me be clear, I'm very much in favor of privacy laws and the GDPR, etc. But usually privacy laws kick in after the fact, after the data breach or privacy infraction takes place. And to me, that's too little, too late. I want it to be upfront, proactive, preventative, try to prevent the privacy harms from arising. To me, that's the ideal solution. And so if you embed privacy by design into your operations, you're golden. One of the essentials of the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design is privacy as the default setting. And that's been included in the GDPR. And what that means is that you don't wait for customers to ask for privacy. People don't have to search through all the legalese and the terms of reference and the privacy policy, finding the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection. Forget that. Privacy as the default setting says we will only use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection that you've consented to. If down the road a secondary use arises, we need to come back to you and seek additional consent for the secondary use. This is golden. People love it. Customers love it. Companies love it because, as I said, it gives them a competitive advantage and it becomes a win-win as opposed to, we're fighting each other all the time. So these are some of the benefits of being proactive and trying to prevent the harms from arising.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Yasu, in your research, from the social network standpoint, all these social networks all over the place, and people thinking that there's, it's no frontier and it's like, the gold rush, just go for it and whatever. How do you find in your researches that what is necessary to educate all this large constituency that's navigating on the social networks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we see the web is different from all private spaces we have, and it's important that we realize this difference. And I think the public is realizing this difference because we have some incidents of stalking, frauds with information that was public on the internet. I think people are starting to realize that the web is really a public place. And I think companies and the government play a very important part in educating users about this. So, and also we just to build on what Dr. Anne mentioned. For example, when you enter in a chat app, in a group, on a chat app, and you see all those telephone numbers, that's a risk. That's not being proactive in defending the privacy of those users, and they think that's private. So this is kind of an example of privacy by design. You should mask those numbers and protect these phone numbers from people, for example. Minding the protocols, the difference between the protocols. So the web has protocols to make information public, organized, and shareable. Like you can share all this information in a very organized way. But when you talk about private spaces, you really have to mind the different types of protocols involved in these operations. So I think it's now we are realizing that the web is a public space. We have a bunch of scraping tools. Anyone can have access to information that is on social media. And we have a bunch of algorithms that play an important role in boosting content. So it's very important that we realize the difference between the protocols. We set up the space when we are making products, minding if that is going to be a private space, a hybrid one, or a public space. And then we go preventative, as Dr. Anne mentioned. So that's it. I think we need to careful the protocols.
Yeah, so I want to lead. You mentioned two words. You mentioned government, and you were talking about, of course, educating the audience and the constituency. And Phil mentioned that he had an academic journey. So I want to take the question to Phil and ask him, in this educational endeavor and challenge that we have, it's not just the general public, it's actually the governments themselves. So the question is, do we think that the most advanced governments that already have something in place and it's working should be out helping the less prepared countries at this point? Because, what we have learned is that the speed of change just keeps getting faster and faster. So we're playing catch up as it is. And if we leave it for the organic growth and maturity, game over again. So I was wondering how more developed governments with a more developed environment could help other governments that are still behind.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I think I think you're your comment that stuff moves very quickly and faster than governments can move and faster than legislation moves is absolutely right. And we've seen that with even with the GDPR, for example. With the GDPR, the first draft it was leaked at the back end of 2011. It actually became sort of applicable in the EU in 2018. That's a period of 7 years, and in technological terms, that's essentially an eternity. I think where privacy legislation stands up best is when it is based around principles. As soon as you try to become too granular, too specific, you can guarantee the legislation will become out of date in next to no time. That, I think, is where regulation has a role to play. So, you have your laws that set out the principles, you have your authorities that then provide guidance about how to interpret those laws to specific contexts, whether that's sector specific, whether it's technologically specific, however it happens to be. And I think if there is a role for I guess government, it's for those regulatory authorities to be producing that guidance that explains to people this is how we expect the law to be applied, and as things evolve over time, for that guidance to evolve likewise and to apply it to the new technologies. The whole issue of governmental interoperability, though, I think is a real challenge. I mean, we see that at the moment with international data transfers. So if you take transfers from the EU, we've had this big Schrems II ruling, says you essentially can't transfer data to countries that are considered unsafe because their regimes aren't essentially equivalent to sort of EU law, unless you take these what we call supplemental measures to protect the data to an essentially equivalent EU standard. The problem we have at the moment is that the guidance we see from the regulators is more or less impossible to comply with in practice. And so we've actually created a standard that is impossible for people to comply with. And I think that sets a dangerous precedent, actually. It almost has the reverse of what you're talking about, because what that then lends itself to is more of a concept of regionalization or balkanization of the internet, of data, and ultimately, I don't think that really serves anybody well. So I think that maybe there's two aspects to it. One is for governments to produce good and meaningful guidance about how to apply the law. And actually, when they do that, you'll often find other countries will point to that guidance and say, well, they did a good example of it. We know either we can rely on their guidance or we will adopt something similar. Equally, it's for us as countries to make sure that when we create rules that actually work and can be applied in practice, rather than rules that may be perceived as kind of pursuing other political agenda.
Yeah, very good, Phil. I'd like to actually share a spoiler with all the panelists, and not for comment, but just for your future reference. The German government, along with the French government, recently has produced a project called Gaia X, which is a federated cloud, exactly to create a single space where everyone can actually conduct business and automatically to be under all the privacy requirements. So I recommend that possibly there could be some fit for some of the things that you guys are doing. We recently, because of we belong to the premier technology association in Brazil called the CESPRO. You see the logo behind me here. And so Brazilian government, South Africa, and another, I can't remember, I think India. Yeah, India, by the way. We're the first countries to actually collaborate outside Europe with the Gaia X federated cloud, specifically to help businesses conduct businesses on the internet, online, digitally, with all the privacy requirements. I have a question here from the audience, and I'll direct it to each one of you. I may start with Yasu. Camila Ivana da Cunha Hassan. She wants to know, what do you think about the privacy laws should be applied when you're talking about new technologies like facial recognition or fingerprints or some systems that are currently being used as a technological advancement for society?
Right. So thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question. As I said, I think privacy laws and principles are only the common ground that we have, and we should aim at the top. So facial recognition, any type of biometric technology, or blockchain, or machine learning technologies, all of them, everything that we develop from now on should look at privacy laws and privacy principles from the Privacy by Design, which we have the guru here with us. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Anne here. We should take that into consideration, and that should be our starting point. The privacy laws are our starting point. It's just, we should obey all of them.
Yeah.
And take them into consideration and engineer privacy principles into our products. That is the next leap.
Yeah, that's the design that Dr. Anne is mentioning. So, Dr. Anne, there's a second question from the audience that I think it fits. And I know, kind of putting you a little bit on the spot, but they want us to compare, what do we think about the U.S. federal privacy law compared to GDPR? And if we think that the GDPR will become the world standard.
Presently, the GDPR is the world standard. There's no question. Countries all around the world are upgrading their existing laws so that they can become compliant with the GDPR and engage in trade and business without any repercussions. So I think clearly the GDPR is going to set the footprint. Whether the United States goes high enough to introduce something like the GDPR, that's a question that remains unanswered. But if I may, Robert, I want to just make a comment about the previous question in terms of facial recognition and fingerprints, etc., and the new technologies that are coming in. I am so worried about this because it is unbelievable. Like in the US, for example, they're now calling for mobile data driver's licenses so that people in the United States don't have to show a physical license plate. They can just have a mobile one. And in Canada, they're talking about things like that too. But what are they also doing in the US with this call for mobile driver's licenses? They're introducing a whole new area for identity theft and identity theft protection. Because the problem is going to be, once all your identifying documents are online, they're going to be hacked like crazy. I mean, hackers are brilliant. They will be attracted to this and they'll make enormous use of this. And identity theft will grow like weeds. And I remember when I was privacy commissioner, a number of victims of identity theft came to me seeking my assistance. And I would tell them the first thing, go to the police and file an occurrence report, something to validate your claim that your identity has been stolen. Then I would work with them to try to clear their name and everything. And it could take years sometimes. So my concern is that facial recognition, which is growing enormously, which is a huge infringement on your privacy in the wrong hands, and other technologies that go online, these are going to present additional major risks to privacy. And unless we are proactive and embed very strong privacy and security related protective measures into these technologies, we're going to have a nightmare in the years to come.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling here missing someone on this panel that could have a lot of merit. This is the Object Management Group out of Boston, and they are ones that set standards. And this is where probably we should be taking these new technologies so we have a common ground for everyone. Very good. So, Phil, and to your point of really on the educational side, and you've been privy to many experiences across very many geographies. So where do you see that there is the biggest challenge worldwide as far as regions are concerned to catch up?
Oh gosh, I'll maybe take the question a little bit more generally, perhaps than specific regions. I think I'll sort of talk about what I think are the two main challenges to regulation globally. To be honest with you, I think the first is obviously the development of new technologies. We've touched upon things like sort of facial recognition and biometrics already. I do think we're sort of seeing technologies like blockchain that are challenging some of the fundamental principles of how data privacy operates. If you take something like blockchain and you say data can never be altered on the blockchain, how does that sit with privacy concepts of correcting inaccurate data? If you were saying data on the blockchain can never be deleted, how does that sit with privacy concepts of not retaining data for longer than is necessary? So we've got some challenges in the way that new technologies are emerging and how they maybe challenge core privacy principles. And I guess there's going to be a question around does privacy needs change or does technology needs change? And I can pretty much guess which side this panel will be on. I think more generally, it's very easy, I think, when you're having these conversations to look at all technology as being bad and privacy regulation and something like the GDPR as only ever being good. I think there's equally a danger in assuming that we've got it right with the regulation currently. And I would say that there are very clear areas where we haven't got it right, and international transfers is a great example of that. Regulating online tracking is a great example of that. Even some of the kind of the more bureaucratic elements of the GDPR, I think, are good examples of maybe where we've strayed too far. And what we're doing is diverting resource away from actual meaningful steps that could be taken to protect privacy into more paper-based exercises. And I think that's something we need to tackle. One of the things that has kind of particularly worried me over the past sort of 2 to 3 years has been a slight trend towards what I would kind of call privacy absolutism, where if I take my sort of if I look back over the span of my career over sort of 20 odd years, the nature of what we consider to be personal data has evolved over time to particularly in European circles now, to sort of make it almost impossible to say that anything isn't personal, and I think that presents some real challenges for some very legitimate uses of data that want to happen. I think the kind of with international transfers, again back sort of 15 years ago, we would talk about sending data to other countries where they had adequate protection. Nowadays, we talk about essentially equivalent protection. In fact, it's almost turned into identical protection. And I think there's a real danger, again, that we are not recognizing that there can be other standards of protection that can be good enough for us to enable movements of data internationally, while it not having to be word-for-word replicas of the GDPR. So I would sort of caution against, I suppose, that's that sort of privacy absolutism as well.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience, and I think it goes back to Dr. Anne. It's related, again, to design. The question is by Gustavo Zaniboni, and he's asking, do you believe we can have privacy without the systems? And I believe you want to say incorporating this as a new functionality, which I think it goes back to having something at the bottom ground, at the design level, being built in from the very beginning. Dr. Anne?
I totally agree with you. You have to build it in at the ground level, because these things take off so quickly, especially with all the amazing new technologies that are available now and the connectivity. If you don't have it at the base when you're starting, you're going to lose any privacy and functionality. And I just want to say, I agree with Phil that privacy isn't intended to put the brakes on data utility. Not at all. You have to have privacy and data utility. It's not a zero-sum game. And I go to great lengths to make that very clear in Privacy by Design. You can and must have both. But the only way you can do that is by embedding it at the outset proactively into your systems. Bake it into the code, make it an essential part of your operations so that people can't forget to do it. It's always present. And then it's baked into your system and the design, and it proceeds along with data utility so that you can have both. It has to be a win-win.
Actually, if I could jump in on the end of Anne's comment there as well. A lot of my work tends to be with technology companies, and I see them right from the stage of the sort of early startup through to becoming very large companies. And I think to Anne's point about building this stuff in from the very beginning, one of the biggest challenges I often see is we speak to some very large tech companies who come to us, and we talk to them about things like pseudonymizing data where possible, or not retaining data for long, indefinitely. And by the time they're big and they're mature, it's very, very difficult to reverse engineer the systems to change all that stuff, because they've got very embedded technologies spread across multiple servers, multiple databases. It just becomes an enormous exercise to do. If you get that right from the startup phase, though, where you're doing it in the very early days, then it lends itself to scale and building a sort of a safer, more trustworthy organization over the longer term. So doing it from the beginning is fundamentally important.
Yeah. There's a good comment here by one of our listeners, Alessandra Monteiro Martins. She mentions that she thinks everyone's misunderstanding, and I think especially the politicians, that privacy by design is actually putting out more policies instead of actually incorporating this at the basis, like Dr. Allen mentioned, baking at the code level. I want to take this to Aline, because she just had an IAPP experience. And I think there's an educational component to the actual practitioners, right? And how relevant IAPP was that you were present at the summit, Aline. If you could comment on that journey for us, please.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, well, what I can say about that, as John Lennon used to sing, but not me, don't worry. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. What I expect is that the national authorities of each country talk to find a common protocol to make the data subject life easier. If I open my banking website, I have one kind of authentication process, okay, to do. And if it's very different from my shopping website, which is very different from my school website, and we don't have any kind of pattern, even for data portability. If you want to start think about a common standard to support the people, we need to push our authorities or create or a pattern. This is my opinion. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Aline. You know, it seems to me from everything that we've talked today is that at the end, you know, we come back to the people-centric equation and not the technology so much. Yes, technology, you know, if we are talking about by design and having everything embedded, we can resolve that, but we still have the people component that needs to understand and have a greater awareness of what the risk that they are incurring. And by that, I want to leave here each one with our last comment. We're coming to the end of our panel, and I'd like to each one have the chance to comment. What do you believe in that needs to be done at the society level, that we really have something that we have discussed here that comes from the design, it comes from baking into the code, and it comes also from baking into the awareness? So I'm going to start with Dr. Anne.
You know, I do a lot of interviews and talking and things. And sometimes people say to me, look, lady, that privacy, that ship has sailed. Surveillance is growing dramatically. It's everywhere. Forget about it. Privacy's out the door. That ship has sailed. And I said, are you kidding me? Get another ship. You don't say privacy is dead. Are you kidding? Are you going to give up on freedom? I think it's essential to let the public know how important privacy is, not just at the individual level, you're trying to protect your information, but at a societal level in terms of preserving freedom. You cannot have free and open societies without a solid foundation of privacy. And we know this historically. So I'm not suggesting that surveillance isn't mounting and that there aren't huge threats to privacy. Of course there are. But what I'm saying is that we can address these and we can build in code and we can embed it proactively by convincing both companies and organizations and governments that privacy works to our advantage, both at a societal level and at the level of companies. It will bring to you positive advantages, and let's move forward with this. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So I'm going to pass on to Yasu, and I'm going to put a little spoiler in that same question. Is what do you believe that possibly governments can help subsidize this initiative of having something embedded from design, by design?
Right, that's the tough question. So I think governments can help the companies actively participate in international standards setting. It's in technology standards, not just regulations, but we need international technology standards as we have in IETF and W3C. We need to participate more and leverage technical standards into our the core of our technologies. And we can also foster a healthy ecosystem that pushes privacy to the core of the business ecosystem. That is really important. And I think that is the challenge that the governments have to, because they have to start talking about this, and it's not just about privacy, but also cybersecurity, not as a cyber war issue, but also as a business issue. And this is really important. I think this is the next frontier.
Yeah. Thank you, Yasu. Phil, leading off on the same question and having you give us how you perceive the current scenario and what we need to actually catch up with and get our program on the road so we can have a more protected society and having real privacy standards and components that help, like Esther Dyson mentioned, giving them the control and the ability to control.
Do you know, I was thinking on what Anne was saying, and I've heard a lot of people say to me that privacy is dead, and I always love the response to that privacy isn't dead, it's hiring, and we see that with just the number of attorneys we're trying to hire. And I think when I look back over my career, when I first started getting into privacy, I remember as a very junior attorney being taken aside by one of my partners, and he said to me, you need to give up on this privacy thing. It's really just a fad. It's going to go away. And he was wrong on that. And then I remember sort of around 2009 when cookie consent laws were being brought in to regulate online tracking. I remember people saying these laws are never going to pass. It would kill the internet. Well, cookie consent laws arrived. Then I remember, sort of 2012, people saying the GDPR is dead in the water. It's never going to happen. Now the GDPR is here, and we've already talked about the fact it's become the sort of the de facto global standard for privacy. Then I remember people saying Privacy Shield isn't going to get shot down because who would want to interrupt international transfers between Europe and the US? Privacy Shield got shot down. So I think the lesson we have to learn from and we keep failing to learn, to be honest with you, every step along the way is that privacy always wins. So I would say if you're going to bet on privacy and start investing in it properly.
Okay, so I'm going to now bring it to me, and I'm going to ask a favor from each one of you. I sit on the board of directors of WITSA, World Innovation, Technology, and Services Alliance. It's a confederation of 88 technology enterprise associations worldwide, representing 88 countries. So I got a network which I can broadcast a message. So I want each one of you to help me. What is the message that I should carry on to help on the endeavor of the awareness? And actually, because all these associations, they have two main vectors. One is advocacy, right? And we're right there in the thick of things with privacy. The other one, of course, is on the business side. But I need your help to help me with my message to take back to WITSA so we can propagate the requirements of having a great awareness of what we need to do.
Okay, Robert, I'm going to start. I tell them, use privacy to advance your interests and protect the privacy of your customers. Make it a win-win so that your business interests are advanced by embedding privacy into your operations. What it will do is it will keep the customers you have, and it will attract new opportunity and new customers. You make it a win-win, privacy and business interests.
Thank you, Dr. Anne. Yasu.
Thank you. I can only agree. And I think we have an exciting future around technologies involving cryptography. And we have to delve into this area and discover new ways of protecting people's privacy online, and so that we can attract new customers and generate new business. And this includes all data related services, because privacy also means organizing data in a way that is comprehensible for the user. So this will mean, for sure, more opportunities for machine learning businesses and all types of a myriad of new services and opportunities, both for the users and for companies.
Thank you very much, Yasu. And I'll now give it to you, Phil. You're muted.
Sorry, I think I would say for companies dealing with privacy, make it a cross-functional issue. Too often it is just a legal problem. And I'm speaking as a lawyer, But so many of the privacy issues I come across are not issues that are solved by a lawyer writing another contract or writing another notice. They require engineers, they require privacy operations, they require people from across the organization to be educated on and to escalate and to understand privacy issues. So invest in it properly and train everybody up on privacy.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I got my work cut off for me to take this message back. We on a personal level are a firm believer of everything we discussed here. And I'm very happy to actually being able to selected to moderate this panel. But this panel is not just about what I need to do with WITSA, it's also about the audience. So I'll ask one more question from you is what is the message you want to leave the audience with? Each one of you, and I'll go back to Dr. Anne.
Never give up on freedom, never give up on privacy. They go hand in hand. But weave it into your operations at a business level so that you get the ultimate win-win. We can do this.
Thank you, Dr. Anne. Yasu.
Yeah, my message also goes for those skeptic people. And so don't be afraid of privacy. It doesn't mean the end of your business. It actually is very much the opposite. So go ahead and dive into privacy. You see new opportunities.
Okay, very good. Phil?
I think I would just say privacy is a human right. You're all human. This is your right. Go forth and protect it.
As simple as that. Very good. Yep. And the last word we're going to leave for Aline. Aline, please, your message as well.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, what was I said in the beginning? It was an honor to be together with some of the people. I was used only to follow and read the articles. I understand that the future of privacy is in our hands. The right of privacy, as written in the Brandeis book, is not only related to big data protection. It's a fundamental right, and it's related to our freedom. That's why we need to take care of that. Thank you all.
Well, with that, I want to thank everyone on the panel, Dr. Anne, Yasu, Phil, Aline. It was a pleasure having you. Hope our paths cross again. And yes, I will do my homework and take my message to WITSA. And I want to thank the audience as well for being here for the last hour. And we hope you enjoy the journey. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.